Hello. Today I want to talk about Verra's new methodology for issuing carbon credits for planting trees. The methodology is known as VM0047, and it's been put forward by Verra as a way of issuing credits that are kind of better than what they've issued in the past when it comes to reforestation or afforestation. So why did they need something new to begin with? Well, a lot of Verra projects are basically paying timber companies to do what they were otherwise doing. A lot of Verra projects appear to be basically paying timber companies to plant trees oftentimes that are non-native and they're monocultures, and just receive credits for, timber big business as usual. This is not good. This is not a true removal of carbon dioxide from the atmosphere, because if the timber company was always going to plant those trees regardless of the carbon project, then, the carbon project didn't need to exist. And these credits, they're not really doing anything that wouldn't have otherwise already happened. So it's been recognized for a couple of years now that there is a need to kind of fix this problem. And VM47 tries to tackle this through a solution called dynamic baselining. And the way that this protocol works is that if you're trying to plant trees on an area larger than a hectare, what you basically have to do is you have to take plots inside your area, and then you have to compare them to plots outside your area. You basically have to look at what your neighbors are doing and see if your neighbors are planting trees also. And if your neighbors are planting trees, then you take a discount. So let's look at the worst case scenario. Let's say that we've got one of these Verra projects that's like this eucalyptus plantation in Uruguay. It's an extremely industrial landscape. You'll find thousands of eucalyptus plantations just like it. I know that this shouldn't be getting carbon credits. You know that this shouldn't be getting carbon credits. Under this protocol, what would happen is that areas around the project would be mapped out, compared as the project progresses, and the project would take discounts, if there was a lot of other people planting eucalyptus trees at the same time. Now, to some extent, I appreciate this. It does kind of get to the bottom of the underlying rate of reforestation on the landscape. But that's about where I have to stop in terms of good things to say about this protocol, because the protocol has a lot of problems. And so what I want to do right now is walk through 10 really big problems that I have with the protocol that could be used to cheat and create fraudulent credits, and how I would fix them if I were creating the protocol. Now, the first problem I kind of already hinted at. The first problem is that the dynamic baseline that they're proposing itself, it's not enough. Because a timber company that's just planting eucalyptus trees in Uruguay could still plant eucalyptus trees and get carbon credits. They'd just take a discount. And frankly, that's not good enough, because you can't just rely on the dynamic baseline itself. If we look at the most industrial landscapes on Earth, Sao Paulo, Brazil, Uruguay, South Carolina, the United States, you will never find a reforestation rate more than 5 or 10%. That's just how slow trees grow. And so the idea that, a timber company could be planting eucalyptus trees in Uruguay and maybe taking a discount of only 10% from their credits, but still getting carbon credits, is just wrong. So there needs to be additional criteria to make sure that the project is justified. And that means that a lot of the projects enrolled in this system, I'm worried, will lack additionality. So what could they have done? Well, they could have just said, if the regional reforestation rate is greater than 5%, then we have to assume that reforestation is a common practice in the region, and you don't get carbon credits. That would have been the safest thing to do. Now, it's funny that we should mention this, because this protocol itself is actually very similar to another Verra protocol that came out fairly recently, called VM45. I had nice things to say about that protocol, but the thing is, it had the same problem. It didn't have any extra checks to see whether or not the projects were additional. And so what ended up happening there with that protocol, that was an IFM protocol around avoiding emissions, around stopping people from cutting their trees down. What happened there was that a bunch of small farmers enrolled who never intended to cut their trees down. And now a bunch of them have gone on record publicly saying, I never intended to cut my trees. And that looks pretty bad if you're giving people credits for basically doing nothing. That's not helping the environment at all. So VM45 needed to have these checks, and VM47 also needs to have these checks, because a baseline itself, all it can do is tell you what the underlying rate is. It's not really checking to see intent. It's not really checking to see if what this project is doing is common. The other way to fix this problem would be to tell people you can't just plant eucalyptus trees. You can't just do non-native monocultures. You have to do a little conservation. You have to do a little native reforestation. As a quick aside, somebody pointed out to me that an August update to Verra's overall VCS standard did introduce the wording that ARR activities of the project shall not introduce non-native monocultures. So this is very good. I'm very glad to see this in the VCS methodology now. However, it does not touch upon my general point about additionality, because there's a lot of monocultures that are still planting native trees. I still don't want to see, Weyerhaeuser, one of the world's largest timber companies, planting Douglas fir plantations in Washington and getting carbon credits for it. Nor do I want to see loblolly pine plantations, nor do I want to see eucalyptus or teak plantations in Southeast Asia. So this is a step in the right direction, but the bigger point that I was trying to make is that the additionality of timber companies receiving carbon credits for stuff that they were already doing is super dubious, and extra checks are needed in this protocol. Imagine if this protocol said 30% of the land always has to be reforested with native trees and conserved. Well, believe it or not, gold standard protocols sometimes say that. So I don't really understand why Verra would create a protocol that allows timber companies to basically just harvest pulp off of their land with non-native species over and over again. It's not that great for the earth, but especially it's very hard to prove the additionality of that. And all of their credits would look a lot better if they just had a rule in place that said 30% of the project area has to be native reforestation. So that's suggestion number 2. Your projects would look a lot more justified if you didn't just let people do like heavily industrial commercial reforestation projects. Now, I have another big problem with this protocol, and we're going to have to get very in the weeds here. Traditionally, reforestation protocols have forbid people from planting trees on land that was deforested less than 10 years ago. Why is this? Well, there's 2 reasons. The first is that we never want to incentivize bad guys to come in and clear-cut rainforest and plant trees and then get a bunch of carbon credits for it. And if you think that's not likely to happen, here's an example of a project that did, in fact, clear-cut rainforests, plant trees, and get carbon credits for it. And here's another example of a project that clear-cut rainforest, planted non-native trees, and got credits for it. And both of these projects, their primary goal is to harvest timber, not carbon credits. So I've looked through this protocol, and it doesn't seem as if this rule is in place for large projects. And this was very puzzling to me, because the protocol itself is actually broken into 2 components. There's a component that you use for large projects, and there's a component that you use for really little projects that are less than a hectare. Well, for the little projects, they're not supposed to plant trees on areas that were forest more than 10 years ago. For the big projects, there doesn't appear to be that scrutiny at all. This is actually a real regression from Verra's current rule, because Verra's current rule says you're not allowed to do this at all. So I don't know why only one part of this protocol has that rule in it, but the bigger part doesn't, but it's very concerning. So I talked about the potential for people to cut down native rainforests and plant eucalyptus trees for carbon credits. The other thing that people could do if you don't have this rule in place is timber companies who are just cutting down trees constantly, they're just rotating out crops. The next time they go and cut their trees and replant them, it seems as if they can get credits. Can you imagine if International Paper in Sao Paulo, Brazil, cut down their eucalyptus trees as they do every 6 years, and this time when they're planting them, they go and get credits for their pulp manufacture? There's no value to that whatsoever. In fact, it's really opening the door for big timber to massively manipulate the system. So that's a major concern, and my solution to that is very simple. It's to copy and paste the rule that already exists in Verra's old system and the rule that seems to exist for little landowners and put it up into the rule that exists for big landowners too. Okay, so we're making our way through it here. I think one of the big problems that I also see with this protocol is that all of the mapping, which is actually pretty important for this one, because the mapping is used to figure out what your neighbors were doing, all of that is being done by the project developer. And this is a real huge conflict of interest. This has led to some of the biggest scandals on Verra's platform today, is that project developers are allowed to create their own maps. They don't have to make them public. They're not going to share them. And for some reason, the maps that they create end up, giving them far more credits than, public scientists' maps. I found it particularly frustrating for this protocol because there are actually public maps of reforestation all around the world. The University of Maryland GLAD Lab, for example, puts out public maps of reforestation that I think would work very well. And these are scientifically derived, unbiased maps. So the fact that this protocol is allowing the project developer to create their own maps is a real conflict of interest, and it's not going to help them in getting better credits. So what's my solution? The best solution is to use public maps, use maps that are derived from peer-reviewed sources, NASA, University of Maryland, institutions. The next best solution would be to have verifiers create the maps instead of project developers. Verifiers ostensibly are a little bit more independent of what's going on in the project than the project developer themselves, who are getting paid by the credits. So, in addition to this, what I also noticed about this new methodology is that there's very little specifics around how these maps are being created. And that's very dangerous because, we're going to end up with a set of very biased maps. Not only are we giving project developers enough rope to hang themselves with, we're kind of encouraging it. If you are going to give project developers the ability to create their own maps, you should have a very prescriptive system that says exactly how many plots, and exactly how the models are trained, and exactly what satellites and what the accuracy needs to be, and the maps should be made public. So, my fix for this is to just be a lot more prescriptive. Let's sit down with some of the world's best scientists, let's sit down with the Hansen Lab, and determine what makes a good map. So, this gets me to my next point, which is that, once again, this is a Verra protocol in which almost all of the data is not going to be made public. The final numbers are going to be made public, but there's no explanation in here that says that they have to make the maps public or the plots public or any of the real math public. And this has driven some of the biggest scandals in the industry, is the fact that, project developers are making their own little private maps behind closed doors, and so for some reason they don't match with scientists' maps, and we'll never really know why, will we? If Verra forces people to make all project data public, including the project's budgets, these projects are going to get a lot better. So that's my next solution. I think we're up to 7 or something. Make all of the data public. It should be a requirement for any carbon credit that's supposedly doing a public service. Let's pivot to another little point, which I have, again, I want to make about all Verra projects, which is that verifications, they only need to be done once every 5 years. This strikes me as being absurd. This is 2023. We have satellites that can constantly monitor the trees. There should never be a situation where a project is deforested, or by fire, or by accident, or by a bad guy, and nobody knows about it for 5 years. So that's the situation we have right now. And what's happening right now is that in Verra's marketplace, there are a lot of projects that are zombie projects. These are projects that have been wildly deforested, and there's no reason for them to ever re-verify again. It's been it's been many years. It'll probably be a full 15 years before anyone does anything. And this protocol just seems to kind of perpetuate that. And it's very frustrating because, we should just be using all of the many deforestation alerts that exist out there today to say, whenever there's a disaster inside of a project, trigger the buffer pool, there's a real problem. So verification should be done more frequently. And then finally, the other kind of problem that I had with this protocol is that if you follow the wording to the letter of the law, there's 2 different avenues, like I said, for getting carbon credits. The avenue for large landowners follows this approach of kind of matching to your neighbor and taking a discount. And in general, at least something is being done to acknowledge the fact that trees could have been planted anyway. But if you're a small landowner, if you're enrolling a bunch of small areas, you get to get out of that. You don't have to have a baseline at all. It's just assumed that you're planting trees and nothing would have happened on that land. Well, I do wonder if a sinister project developer would just dice their project up into a bunch of little small areas. And the reason I wonder that is because I've seen a lot of carbon projects that dice their little project areas up into lots of little small projects in order to manipulate the protocols. And so this type of gerrymandering happens all the time in American IFM protocols. It happens in like Latin American ARR protocols. I see no reason why this wouldn't happen here too. And so if this does happen, then all of this hard work of making this protocol, like, have this baseline that kind of is supposed to reflect what likely would have happened, it's all going to go down the drain because people are just going to be able to say, oh, nothing would have happened. Well, so where are we left with this protocol? It seems obvious to me that these 10 tweaks can go a really long way towards creating like an ironclad protocol for reforestation. As it stands today, the protocol has good intentions, as so many of them do, but it would be extremely easy to manipulate to get more credits. And in fact, every single one of these 10 points, I can point to projects that are analogs for these types of cheating. And so I have no reason to believe that this Verra reforestation protocol is going to make better credits. So I'm deeply concerned that, the protocol is not going to work out. One of these days, maybe I'll review a Verra protocol and not have something horrible to say about it.